Okay, you still with us, Matt?
Yeah.
All right, good. Can you hear that okay off of the cell phone? Okay, good.
I can hear fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I was asking folks in the audience if they could hear you. So everybody seems to be okay with the sound. We have kind of your screen blocked at the moment with something that's, I guess, in front of. But we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Yeah. And note it, I guess from the study group itself, we have Mike Strange, Sharon Lynn, Bruce Williams, and Kevin Williams. Chris is here taking notes, and we have 4 guests with us in the audience today. So we wanted to since certainly everyone at the table was here for the last meeting where we kind of went through and developed, refined the workbook, and then had the options of how to go in and manipulate some of the variables. So I guess we want to just kind of start there and maybe get feedback from the folks that looked at it and see if there's anything we need to tweak as a result of the hands-on application this weekend.
I was going to tell you we need to go back and start over for April Fools.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Did we have anything in there that averages the ready to serve charge over the period of time, or we just pick the time and make a decision that yes, it should be averaged, or no, it shouldn't, and go from there? Because we talked about it wasn't going to make too much of a difference.
So the ready to serve, say that again now, whether to use.
Whether we have it fixed by the first year figure that we come up with, or whether it's smoothed over the 3-year, 4-year, whatever time period.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. Did we? Yeah, I guess what are the thoughts? I think
we had talked about it, but I don't think we ever said one way or another.
So this is Matt. I can comment on it. Yes, I believe that was Bruce talking. You're correct that in the workbook now there's just a 1-year look at the ready to serve charge. It's based on FY20 projected costs, but we can put in there. I can put in there whatever the group feels is the best way to do it. If you'd like to take a look at one that covers multiple years, we can do that. If you'd like to take a look at just FY20, we have that already. If you know, whatever, it's really whatever the group desires, we can get in there. So
my feeling was we were setting these up to smooth the rates, and it's a simple smoothing of that ready to serve charge. It's easy to do. It doesn't make too much of a difference, but it's consistent.
I certainly like that idea. Yeah. So if we whatever rate period we ultimately choose, you would provide whatever I'd say cost of living increases, but inflation rate over that period of time is 2% or whatever over that period of time, and then normalize it across those 4 years, 3 years, 2 years. Okay. Sound okay? All right.
Yeah. I would probably just like how we're doing with the rates, I'd probably create a tab just for the ready to serve and put each year's calculation in there, and then the smoothing just below that, just like we have for the rates now.
Yeah. All north-south head nods at the table, so that's a good idea. And then we'll just base it on whatever rate period we decide we ultimately like.
Right, and we know it's not going to make too much of a difference.
Correct, right, because it's a small number.
Okay.
And just administratively, Matt, could you you have the controls now? We don't, because it's on the WebEx. Can you just kind of make that workbook a little bigger on the screen?
Yeah, thank you.
Last week we could manipulate the size, but
the window that it's in.
Oh, maybe you can't control that. Yeah, because right now it only takes up about half of our screen, maybe 2/3 of our screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. There's definitely a way to change that. Do you have a box that's sitting over the top right part of your screen?
No. Oh, here we go.
No.
There we go. Yeah, no, we might be okay. Hang on 1 second. I might have some control. Ah, we're good. I have some controls. Yeah. And you're right, it is over on the right-hand side. We had kind of pushed it out of the way, so I didn't notice it. So we're good now.
Yeah, there's a way to minimize that. It's not ideal, it's kind of in the way, but at least you can make it smaller.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
So I guess maybe go to our, the page where we input the variables, and we'll just kind of walk through and get everybody's feel for what we used and what they felt would be appropriate.
Was there any?
Talking about this screen, Kevin?
Yes.
Was there any update to the division of the fixed and non-fixed since last time?
No, no. And as I understand it, Matt, the only thing that's still kind of a due out is the discussion with Bert about vacation and sick leave and how that's incorporated into the salary information. And whether it's included in there or as whether it's an administrative cost that's included in there, and we need to take note of that or not.
And I think maybe that's what I was thinking of.
Okay. But again,
so the first two orange tabs have not changed since we last spoke.
right. So at this point, I guess we'll just ask. I think we thought last week that we liked the ready to serve fee as opposed to a minimum fee, and one or the other and not both.
Yes.
So we're going to proceed with the ready to serve fee. We're going to base it on the calculation we did and showed last week, with whatever tweaks we make to it based on our discussion with Bert on the administrative costs in there. And that's out. Yeah. Okay. I think we had agreed on previous meetings that we liked fixed costs against the total flow and non-fixed against the peak flow. Has there been any, after using the spreadsheet over the weekend, any change to that methodology?
Nothing changed, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're good there. We talked, if you could scroll down just a little, Matt, we talked about the remaining balance in the surcharge account of about $1.5 million, and that we were going to distribute that over a period of 6 years to bring rates down by applying that to this analysis. So $250,000 a year over 6 years. Is that still good, or do we want to try to do a different period over that for that, or we like the way it is?
I think any selection's quasi-arbitrary anyway, so it's, unless there's a rational objection one way or the other, it seems, it's just...
Yeah, the only thing that I kind of thought about over the weekend was, is there any goodness in setting that to whatever our fixed rate period is going to be? So if we pick a 4-year period, maybe we distribute over that first 4 years.
Right. But that may provide the illusion of a lower rate.
Correct, it would, it definitely would.
And this was really an investment for the future.
Okay.
So I think I'd probably lean more towards the 6.
Okay.
I mean, it could just easily be 5 or 7, but
Right. Okay, well, I'm fine with that too. Any other comments on that?
I think that's good.
Okay, we'll leave it right there then for the analysis, and then so the other option up there is the idea that surplus, that as we think we are going to be collecting a little bit more because of what we're doing with the fixed and non-fixed costs each year, and I think what we had kind of come around to at the last meeting was to take that surplus and then just based upon whatever our fixed period is, then at the end of that, we would take any surplus that's left and apply that to the next upcoming period.
Right.
So if at the end if we pick a 4-year period, and at the end of that 4-year period, we got 100,000 left in a surplus or a contingency fund or whatever, then we would use that in our analysis to set the rate for that next 4-year period.
right.
And it seems like a reasonable thing to do, given that we're setting this up, and it's like, if it is approved to go with this direction, that we want to have maybe a little bit of extra there just as a cushion, because you want to see how this goes, and it's also that so far we're based on the numbers based from 2016 and
Right.
17, maybe there's been some changes. So it's good to have a little bit of a cushion there to make sure this thing flies.
Yeah, and I think that's, yeah. So I think we're okay with that, Matt. So,
Leaving it as, yeah, that was leaving it as no, I'm sorry.
well, it's a yes, but we're gonna do it at the end of whatever that first determined rate period is gonna be. So I guess during that period, if it's a 2, 3, or 4-year period, the answer is no. If it's over the 12-year period, the answer would be yes. So.
Got it, okay.
If that makes it.
We'll leave it no for now, we can always adjust later.
Correct. It'll be whatever that lump sum is at the end of that first fixed rate period, then we would use that in setting the next period's number.
Right, but that setting of that next period is probably not something that's going to be done in the near future, right? That's down the road.
Unless we pick a 1-year term, which nobody seemed to want to do. Certainly last week, or any of the weeks, nobody's wanted to do a variable rate.
Right. Okay.
So then the only other new thing that I think we asked you to do was to look at the periods again and throw a 2-year period in there so we could just compare the difference between the 2-year, 3-year, and 4-year kind of look.
So one thing though, Kevin, I think I need to change this because if we were to look at because right now this has no ready to serve. And if we were to look here, then these numbers are based on the fact that there's no ready to serve. Now granted, because we're probably gonna look at a leveling out of a ready to serve anyway, these are still gonna change, but I should probably set this yes, just to be a little bit more accurate with those numbers.
Correct. I would agree.
And we agreed that we're gonna use the administrative cost number that we came up with, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so here is the rates tab, the current version, just based on those settings that we just discussed. And the top row is what's calculated if you were to jump rates year to year based on cost recovery. And option 1 is your 2-year, option 2 is your 3-year, option 3 is your 4-year, option 4 is your 6-year. So what that means is the leveling out of rates over that amount of time. So for option 1, for example, it's leveled out over a 2-year period, and then a different leveling over the next 2 years, and then a different leveling over the following 2 years. And you'll see that I highlighted in similar colors the ones that are the same. So for option 1, the first 2 years are in yellow. For option 1, the years 3 and 4 are in orange, and then the following 2 years are in yellow again.
So
I just thought it would be easier to look at that way. That's why I did that.
Sure, and just because we have a couple of new visitors with us in the audience, let me just back up one step. What we had asked them to do, one option as we were working through this analysis resulted in a different rate every year based upon the anticipated expenses and costs for that year. And it was, peaks and valleys. So what we'd asked Matt to look at is picking a rate, keeping it constant for a period of time. We first looked at 3-year period, a 4-year period, and then last week we asked them to go back and do it too. So this gives us across the top, if we were going to change it each year to balance the books each year, how it would fluctuate. Option 1 is if we set a rate and just agreed that we were going to leave it in place for 2 years and then change it every 2 years. And then the same for option 2 is a 3-year window, change it 3-year window, change it 3-year window. And then option 3 was the 4-year, and then option 4 was the 6-year. So that's the difference in those options that you see up on the screen. Just to bring everybody up to a common understanding. So thanks, Matt. Go ahead. And if there's any questions as we go through, please feel free to ask. We kept it fairly informal.
Right. I agree. So not the rest of the workbook, but the things that I want the group to focus on, that we want the group to focus on from here is, there's some detail that's kind of hidden in the workbook, but there is a tab for each of these options, including the variable one, which is row 5. shows user impact, and we might as well just start with by looking at one of them and just be easier to show that. Is there one particular option that you would prefer we look at, Kevin?
Anybody have a? We'll look at 4.
4 year.
4 year, please.
All right, so that's option 3. So for each of the options, the tabs are set up the same. So you'll see graphs just that apply to this option, but if you were to look at any of the options, you would see similar graphs. Here's 2, here's 1.
That's very handy.
They're all set up. But it allows you to compare. It allows you to compare them really easily because you can just go from one tab to the next and see the differences. You can print them out, see the differences. Now, I think the graphs are pretty big for at least my Excel application, which I guess you're probably looking at. So it probably looks this way for you as well. This chart, this graph is meant to represent the revenue requirement compared to what we are projecting for revenue coming in based on the ready-to-serve charge and the rate. And this is option 3 is the 4-year leveling of rate.
So yeah, so that if I understand what that shows me is the orange line is what we're bringing in, and the blue is what the expenses are. So we're collecting a little we're getting a little bit surplus at the beginning, and then we're dampening that peak that we know happens at the 4 or 5 year mark that's depicted here in the blue. Is that correct understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, the middle years, as you can see, as we kind of hit the corner point of the orange here, we're projecting less revenue coming in than the cost, or I should say the revenue requirement. But consider how the first few years go, where the orange is ahead of the blue. So with that, you're projected to bring in a lot more revenue than the revenue requirement. So that'll help mitigate the fact that it's the opposite it's really a short period, maybe a few years, 2 or 3 years before it flips back the other way.
And that was the whole idea, was to cut that spike.
Right. But if I remember my freshman calculus, the areas under those curves are probably pretty close to being equal. But that's been a while.
So I'm just going to scroll down for a second because we do have tables down here. Because whenever you have graphs in Excel, they need to be based on certain numbers. The tables are down below if you ever wanted to look at the numbers. If you were to print the page, these would not print. Okay. Currently, I have the print just to show the graphs, but we could change that too if we needed to. But the top row here is your revenue requirement, and ever since we started this rate analysis, these rate discussions, we've always looked at this particular 12-year period, which starts in FY20 and goes out to FY31. The revenue requirement is based on our projected costs for each of these years, based on the analysis that we've done for the city. That total right there, $43.4 million over that 11-year period, 12-year period. Projected revenue, 46.3. So that's a difference of almost $3 million over that time period. I just want people to be aware. So even though this, you may look at it and the first thing you focus on is the blue being higher than the red in those particular years, if you take a step back and look at the complete picture, it tells you a little bit of a different story.
And if we took if we wanted to take the surplus of the first 4 years and apply it against the second 4 years, then obviously that number would come down.
Yeah.
Right. Or we may say we like having the security of a surplus and just let it ride.
Yeah.
So the first 4 years I have it about 11.1 million for the revenue requirement, and 11.6
Right.
is the projected revenue. So that's about a little more than $500,000 difference.
Right.
So Kevin, it depends on how we present the data.
Right.
In theory, what you just said is correct, but this particular graph shows revenue requirement compared to projected revenue for rates and the service charge. Okay?
Yep.
Revenue requirement in this case means what you're trying to recover with those things, and it excludes certain costs because we are using that surcharge reserves, for example.
Oh, good point. Yeah. Yep.
So the revenue requirement is reduced for that reason. So if you were to reduce it further with a surplus, like you just said a moment ago,
right,
then the graph would probably look similar to this if you're showing the same exact graph.
Right. Okay.
Now that's why I said in my email that I sent when I sent out the latest version of the workbook, it may make sense. I think this graph is helpful, no question. But to show the real complete picture, I think I'm going to introduce a different graph, probably in the next version, that'll show all of that stuff. It'll show what the true costs are, rather than just what the revenue requirement is.
Okay.
And then what we're doing to meet or exceed those costs.
Okay.
So we're planning on using some of that surcharge reserve, for example.
Right.
And then the rest might be rates and the rate of surcharge. I think that'll paint the picture a little bit more complete than this is. But
okay.
I think this is still helpful.
What this, in this particular case, because we're going to be, we believe that we're going to recommend a multi-year model that has ratepayers paying more than what the absolute costs are in the early years in order to smooth things out. When we do something like that, we're going to end up with an excess of revenue. What does the city do with excess revenues? Are they invested?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So in terms of a safe investment that's off to the side, even though it's dedicated for this purpose, it in of itself will still be generating 1 or 2% a year.
Yes.
So, okay.
And then there's that point that I kept making last time, which was, as long as you don't siphon it out and use it for something else. I'll keep beating that horse.
Yeah, right.
We don't do that.
Well, even if it, I would support that, and I think it makes sense. But on the other hand, if you look at the aggregation of the functioning of a municipality that we are ratepayers of, whether it's in taxes or in fees or another form, the vibrancy of the city function hopefully is for all our benefits, so that depending on what happens, we could have a disaster strike, we could have a nor'easter that takes out the boardwalk. There could be a whole series of things where it would make sense to utilize the city's capital as opposed to going into more debt, depending on the circumstances.
Right.
So I would say I agree with you substantially, but there's still always the possibility that something may happen, but it would have to be of a significant nature.
My old college economics course, ceteris paribus, everything else being equal.
Latin, I take it.
So what we're really down to then is, I think, is it 3 or is it 4, or are there other options that people feel strongly about?
Is that question on the table?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One thing that I did was I looked at the percentage increase over, if we go back, Matt, can we go back to the previous tab that we were on that showed the 2, 3, 4, and 6? Yeah, that one. If you look at the percentage increase from row 9 to row 11, and then at row 17, which I just moved, 17. So comparing that 873 to the 1206 and the 1404 for those first fixed periods, the increase is 30. I got to put my glasses on to read my writing. 38% if we go with the 3-year, and 61% if we go with the 4-year. And the placeholder that the city is now using that's in effect is the 60%. So
It's
I feel
almost
like,
right there.
I feel like option 3 at the 4-year is kind of in line with what everybody's been led to believe. And it makes for a much smaller increase in year 5, percentage-wise, over the first 4-year rate period. I did that, and I don't have it with me, but I remember it as being like more than doubling. Yeah, because you would go from 1206 to 2698 in year 4. Right. And that's really going to catch people by surprise. And the percentage increase would be much smaller from year 4 to year 5 in option 3. It's still large, but it's not as enormously large. So I think option 3 at 4 years is the better option. Yeah, 3, 129% versus 78%.
And then 2 years earlier.
Yes. So option 3 is more smooth.
Yeah.
It is a big jump because of that. It's because of those large capital costs.
Right.
In the middle part of this analysis. But keep in mind that on the flip side, things are coming back down. These are all negatives. Once you get past that, showing a rate decrease. Not a substantial one, when you consider that this is over 120, but still.
I like 4. Mike, do you have a feeling?
When I looked at it, I looked at it a little bit different way, was each of these has, I think, with the exception of 1 and 2 years, they kind of stood out as not particularly being beneficial. But when you looked at the other 3 options, or even within the total range of 3, 4, 5, 6, each of them has benefits for the time period and then has some impacts after the time period. And I couldn't come up with a compelling argument that said one, from a fiscal standpoint, from a user standpoint, was materially better than the other, because they each have an event that changes at the end of the time period. And so now the question then really becomes one of from a social standpoint, or from an individual standpoint, of which time frame would people prefer to have for a planning cycle in the context of everything that goes on around us. So is 3, 4, or 5, or 6, can anyone come up with a substantial reason that isn't just purely financial as to why it should be one versus the other? 3 or 4 seem to sound good in the context of not knowing the future, if you will, and allows a person to plan and allows the city to plan with some assurity. But that's strictly an arbitrary evaluation on my part. I couldn't come up with a rational justification that said, absolutely this one.
I kind of took 6 out of the equation just because it's such a dramatic increase first year, and it's nice that it stays flat. But who knows what's going to happen in 12 years, over the course of the 12 years. It just
that'd be valid.
Philosophically seemed a little too off for me. And then between 3 and 4, I just kind of like the fact that, the 4-year period to me is a decent period. I think most of our literature said most times rates stay between 3 and 5 years is kind of the review time. So it was in that range, and it just mitigated that 123% at year 4. Instead, it becomes a 78%, although both high, but a little more manageable. So that's kind of because it takes a chunk of that first year of the spike, which 3 kind of takes you right through the spike. Okay. And that middle 3 years was those spike years, so it was hard to mitigate that a little bit. So I was leaning toward the 4.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think the psychological effect of that big jump is harder to deal with than the lower jump.
Yeah.
know, 123 versus 78.
Mhm.
So we're leaning towards 4 as
Leaning towards
a,
4,
as a
yeah.
consensus.
I think.
Yeah, I don't,
Right. So I think, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think minus a couple of tweaks there on the administrative cost that we're using for the service, the ready to serve fee, I don't know that there's any other decisions that we would need to make to be able to present that recommendation to the board. Do you see anything else that we would need to look at?
Just validation that you think we have the cost allocations broken down properly. I mean, I know we've been over it several times, but maybe one last review of that would be good.
Okay.
Because a lot of what we're doing is based on that. And then maybe another review of the administrative cost piece, how that's being calculated. But in terms of, you know, other things that we want to get in here,
Mm-hmm.
I can't really think of anything. You know, we've been over this several times, and it seems like everyone's getting comfortable with what we have here. So
Right.
you know, I think we're close. Just probably those last few things, and we're good.
So
Yeah, and that ready to serve smoothing, but that decision is already made.
yeah, I think
It's
we
just fixing that.
correct. I think we decided what we want to do.
Yeah.
He's just got to get the number right
Yep.
now. So I guess my question would be to this group: would we feel comfortable taking at least where we are on the sewer side to the working group meeting a week from today, next Monday, and at least just kind of lay out where we are, what we think we have, and then with a recommendation for what we have.
Let me ask you a question, Kevin. I think the answer is yes, in terms of what we have here today.
Right.
And I would feel very comfortable with that and defending it, and how we arrived at this. But when we arrive at this, when we have these numbers, which is based on the sewer flow, the other part, which I think is actually going to be the bigger challenge, is dealing with the water and coming up with a fair and equitable system that keys this and how that's structured from a commercial residential perspective and a whole bunch of other things. Let me ask a really dumb question. Are we, this group, going to be the same group that's assessing the water issue?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Please.
Yeah.
No, I've been researching that since we started this.
Right.
And I think it's a very, very important aspect. I mean, we had to get this done to where it passed the test of reason and had some rational basis. But the real challenge then comes on the water side, which has other dimensions which are not just physical, not just expenses related to within the city. Now it relates more to the social function, if you will, and the architecture of the city. So.
Okay. All right.
And
You'd rather work through that before we go to the board?
Well, I think we need to,
Okay.
I think we need to do. I'm sorry. Which
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
I think we need to
do this.
water.
Oh, before we do the whole
Yes.
package. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And that was my question. Were you just saying a minute ago, before Michael spoke, that you were saying that we were going to take the sewer proposal to the board separately? Is that what you had been saying?
My thought was, because, you know, they always ask at each meeting, so if nothing else, just be able to go tell them that we think we have a recommendation on sewer. Maybe we don't take it all the way to, here's the recommendation, but update them on that versus showing them where we are with the recommendation and just tell them, you know, we're still working water, and we'll come back with that when we have it. So either way, I mean,
Well, you're giving an update.
have to give an update.
So
Sure.
I think that can be part of your update, not the final
Okay.
determination.
Okay, so here's where we are and here's where we're
Yes.
going.
Yes.
Not that we have a recommendation for
Yes.
you yet, but we can get into some of the details of where
That's
we're
what I
working
think.
on the
Right.
sewer.
Yeah, I
Everybody-
think that's appropriate.
Everybody's okay. Everybody's okay with that. All right, that's the way we'll do it then. Thanks. Okay then. Everybody want to start looking at water?
Sure.
Matt, we ready to shift gears a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I have for the folks at the table, and I think I have enough. Who we have in the audience?
Thank you.
So I don't know if you have the, you know, the kind of the preliminary work you've done on the water from last fall. But not, what I handed out to everyone is a copy of our, kind of our rate schedule as it is now, and the various categories, you know, in town, out of town, Breezewood, a couple of special categories for like the YMCA and those kind of things. And it talks obviously to a surcharge and then a flow rate. So I guess maybe just philosophically, do we want to kind of start with the model we used on sewer that we ended up having as a sort of a ready to serve fee and then a flow based rate? Similar in philosophy that we did with the sewer.
So let me just speak for one moment, Kevin,
Sure.
on this. So we haven't talked about water in a very long time, as you know. Originally, the analysis that we did for the city was over a 5-year period for both water and wastewater. And they were the 5 years were FY19, which is now since concluded, through FY23. The wastewater discussion, once we got into the rate discussion part of wastewater, we expanded that from the 5 years out to, it was really 13 years at the time. And then once FY19 was out of the picture, that's when it became the 12 years, FY20 through FY31. Now, you may recall the real reason why we did that was because we wanted to line up what we were projecting in our analysis and the financial analysis with the capital plan layout that GHD had provided. They went all the way out to FY31. We thought it made sense to mimic that, so we went out to FY31.
Right.
We have not done that yet on the water side. We're still looking at the original 5 years, and that's what you see right here in front of you. But obviously, we could do that if that's what made the most sense to do. I've quickly just put together this chart real quick to show you the projected expenditures that we have over the 5-year period, which is 19 through 23. Yes, it jumps up a little bit, but this is a much smaller scale than what we've seen on the wastewater side. The first year is just north of $2.3 million, and then after 5 years is just south of $2.7 million. Now, granted, if we were to go out all the way to 31, I'm guessing this will creep up a little bit higher. But again, I don't think we're on the scale that we were on with wastewater, where this chart has us at a low point of $4.5 million, whereas we're looking at 2.7 a moment ago, and a high point of 13.3. So much different scale financially, but still. And Kevin, you kind of mentioned a moment ago, you know, we could definitely look at the same model, the same rate structure setup, similar one, with the ready to serve as we did with wastewater. And now that we've done the work to get that set up in the format that we have in that other workbook for wastewater, you know, we could do something very similar for water relatively easily. I think the tricky part is simply going to be getting the expenses right if we do want to carry it out all the way to 31, or however far you want to go. It doesn't have to be to 31. And I might as well show you GHD's table. Yeah, they went out to 31 for water too.
Right. So
I hid that part because we had hidden it because we were only focused on those 5 years when we did the financial analysis.
Right. So I like the consistency of looking at the same period of time. It doesn't have, you know, water doesn't have the big capital expenses, the big spike, you know, like the wastewater does, or the projects aren't of the scale that the wastewater is. But there's a significant CIP beyond that 5-year period. So I would feel more comfortable if we did it out to the kind of the same period of time, because we have pretty decent resolution on what those costs are. You know, knowing it's still 10, 11, 12 years out, but it's a pretty good assessment, I think. Anybody else?
I agree.
And I agree, and going back to your original question of, however you phrased it, was there a reason to start with the same model? It seems like there is a good reason, because that model is flexible and should work, and if it doesn't work, we'll realize it once we get into it. But it would be some consistency that would make it easier in the future to deal with if you're dealing with the same structure.
And I would have a hard time going and explaining how great this model was.
But we didn't use it on water.
But we decided not to use it on water. You know, unless there was a compelling reason that said, well, it's just apples and oranges. We haven't come across that yet, to my knowledge. It seems like we could use the same kind of
No, you're right. If we use the same structure for both, it makes it that much easier if we elect to do whatever it might be differently.
Exactly.
So it's apples to apples all across the board.
I like that thought. And I like the thought of using the same rationale for coming up with a ready-to-serve fee. It's kind of the administrative thing. We've kind of worked through that once. We know what that would look like as we kind of put that together on the water side. So I think I think we got consensus here, Matt, for that. That's what we want the next version of the water side to look like. We'll take it out to the 12-year period.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, why would you not do that if we were basing it off of GHD's timetable and the timetable is the exact same time period for both? So,
and we'll need to go through the cost allocation probably again with the
and also maybe some validation from them that this still works, because I think at one point we did go back to them on the wastewater side and they may have tweaked things a little bit. I don't know if we ever talked to them about the water side and whether they would tweak that table. So it's probably just worth asking. But I can go ahead and start working with what I have here, and we can always adjust later if we have.
And I'll contact them and see.
And then, Kevin, I guess it's probably worthwhile for us to have a similar discussion around, SRF borrowings, if that's even in play on the water side. I'm not remembering off the top of my head if we've even had those discussions or where we are with that.
Right, we were not anticipating using SRF funds on the water side.
You were not?
We're not, because all of our capacity is really on the sewer side. We're using all of our capacity on the sewer side.
Okay, so does that mean no borrowings at all on the water side? And just assume outlay for everything?
Correct.
Okay, that makes it easy.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the allocations that you just mentioned a moment ago, Kevin,
Right.
you worked with GHD on those really, really big projects on the wastewater side. So you did outfall, and you did wastewater treatment plant upgrade.
Right.
I'm not sure we're going to see one on the scale of that when we look at water. We have this pipe replacement right here. I guess that's kind of big, but
There's no large, no one large expense on the water like we have with the plant upgrade. I mean, it's all kind of programmatic things where you anticipate doing typical renovation or replacement of pipe, rehabilitation of pipe. So much more programmatic that you dedicate an amount of dollars out of the CIP each year to attack the aging infrastructure. But it's not like one big expense.
right. Okay.
So I guess what we need to also start thinking about for the folks at the table is the various categories of users. Because I think currently, if you look at that little table, You know, basically, if you were out of town, we were providing water to you out of town. It was basically double what we charge our in-town folks. So we just need to think through, is that something we want to continue? Is that something we don't want to continue? You know, how we want to do that. And then you saw Breezewood rates are 1.5 times what our in-town rate is. So those are the big breakouts of.
Who is Breezewood?
They're the development. If you go out to like Atlantic Liquors and turn left.
Okay.
I hate to use the liquor store as my point of reference, but it's behind the food line. There you go. And it's the location of 3 of our wells, 6, 7, and 8, all reside within that community. So I'm guessing, and I don't know, maybe some of the folks in the audience may know how we came to that 1.5 times for Breezewood, because we
took their water.
And they weren't using all of our system. It's their water kind of deal.
We took their water from the ground and gave them back.
Gave it back.
The double rate, because we were using their water.
Okay, all right. So there may be some goodness in maintaining that. You know, we'll need to discuss that.
Do we physically own the land that the well is on?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's 3 individual parcels too.
All right, so we have wholesale and retail rates essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a good way.
I was just
Yes,
gonna
ma'am.
know, just reading next door, given what Tidewater charges, I don't think you'll have many problems with the people outside.
Yeah, as a Tidewater
Tidewater,
constrictee, yes, I would agree.
just throwing that out.
Yeah.
So, how many wells are there? 3?
Well, we have a couple. I don't know how many.
I think there's at least 7.
At least, yes, because 1 or 2 are inactive.
We have 2 West Hope.
Yeah.
Side by side. Well, we have
3.
Road,
Yeah, 3 at Lynch.
and you have the Lynch well.
Lynch Well is a complex, so there's a couple out there.
And the reason we went out, because the wells used to be here, we had salt intrusion as a result of pumping, so we went way out.
Yeah.
And gave their water back to them in exchange for giving them their water back. We did not do the ×2 rate.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so
Seemed logical at the time.
right.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my hands around water.
Yeah, right. And they obviously charge a different rate in the, the middle of the summer 6 months than they do in the winter 6 months.
And I was having a little trouble interpreting these last 2 columns on this page.
So if you look at, the red is what, as we were in the throes of this group trying to recommend a rate, this was what the 30% increase on water is in real dollars. So the black is what it is now, 210 per 1,000 gallons. With the 30% increase, it would go to 2.73 per 1,000.
So essentially, these red numbers would be up a line, up a row, if there were room.
Correct, because that's the, we sent a memo out to each of the residents that we hadn't come up with a resolution on the exact number yet, but in order to start the process, they were going to see a 30% increase. So that's what those numbers reflect in the water side, and same down at the sewer side. So that's a 30% water, 60% sewer increases in each rate. And this was what I was talking about, whatever we come up with, there's like 40 of these numbers that if we used exactly the same system.
Right.
So in order to implement what we said we were going to implement with the April bill, is she's got to go in and change 40 some odd different numbers. So,
but essentially, for this to be kind of clearer, it would be that the piece of paper would be wider and all of those red numbers would jump up to go to the right of their black numbers.
Sure, it just show here's what it's going to. Yep.
What's this last one?
That's sewer for, I forget who that user is. I think it's down by Silver Lake. Is there like a no man's land down at Silver Lake that we do sewer for? And then the YMCA is the YMCA. So we charge it, even though they're out of town, we charge them an in-town rate. Okay, so Matt, it looks like, so the work to be done is you again on the water side. And then, we'll get, maybe get Bert, me and you to kind of talk through the, first cut on the cost allocation percentages again.
Yep.
Looking at water. Anything you need guidance from, the panel or the group? Any questions you want to throw before the group?
The only thing I can think of, because what I'm thinking about is, you know, basically we're going to use the wastewater. I'm going to make some tweaks to it first, but we're going to use that model for water. So I'm trying to think about how wastewater and water are different, and you've already brought up the fact that there are different rates for Breezewood and out of town. So when we're trying to calculate that projected revenue, like I've done for the wastewater,
Right.
then we'll need to factor those in if the rates are indeed different.
Okay.
So it's probably going to be just an extra layer, really, on the water side
Okay.
to account for that. It's not it's going to be one line of rates necessarily. It'll be probably multiple lines. I'm just kind of thinking out loud as we're going here. So I don't think it decided now, obviously, for how those rates would look, those other areas.
Right.
But I need the workbook's going to have to be flexible enough to account for the possibility that they're different, and most likely they would be different.
Right.
But besides that, and that's not a decision point, I can just set up the workbook to be configurable in that regard. Besides that, I can't think of anything. Can you think of any other differences between water and wastewater that we should be thinking of? And the capital plans are different, but we'll get that figured out.
Mm-hmm.
I think where we're starting is I think it's the essential starting point, and then try to establish on the water side. One of the things that we did in the wastewater side, which makes totally rational sense, it was a fully absorbed cost model. Both the fixed and the variable costs were allocated out completely, so that it was fully recovered on a quote per gallon basis. When we do the water side, I think it's going to be more of a challenge ultimately as we start to assess it, because with the residential side of the equation, water usage in a typical town, not Rehoboth, water usage for a residential property, based on all the data around the country, goes up about 25 to 50% in terms of their usage. Our usage aggregately in water, peak versus non-peak, goes up by 400%. But it doesn't go up by 400% for a residence, a pure residence. It goes up because of all of the activity, and the fact that we have a tourist equation. I mean, we're a destination site. So I think somehow we're going to be getting into a discussion on what has been raised at the initial meetings, was this whole concept of fair and equitable on the water side. That has to be done, that is maybe done differently than what we did on a fully absorbed model that was done for sewer. Even though we start at the same place, I think we may end up with different follow-on equations and assessment on the water side. It may be inclining, I don't know what it's going to be. I mean, right. We've talked about what the rest of the world is doing in the United States in terms of 60% of all the municipalities do inclining block, et cetera. They differentiate between residential and residential as commercial when it's used for commercial purposes, even though it's still a residence, i.e. it's rented. So I think there's a lot of food for thought, but we've got to start with this base, or otherwise it'll be almost impossible to we need a good baseline.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think that if we could, everybody kind of check calendars right now. We want to try to get scheduled for next week. We have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow. I don't know, we'll ask Matt, do you think you'd have something that would be worth getting back together and looking at with the, on the water side?
Say yes, I'm here.
No, are we gonna have?
I just think there are just too many things that need to be sorted out prior to
Right.
presentation, for lack of a better word, to the group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that we got to get through the weeds a little bit, make some decisions on some of those costs and things like that before the group sees that, unless they want to be involved in kind of the allocations. But that's usually more what you, Bert, and I work on, Kevin. So
Right. Yeah, I would prefer we do. The three of us kind of work through a recommendation and then bring it and we tweak it with the group.
Right.
But at least do a first cut with the three of us.
Yeah, I think that's a better course of action.
All right, so why don't, and Bert's not here right now, but why don't we assume that the three of us will talk tomorrow at 1 during our scheduled time period. We'll cancel the group meeting for tomorrow, and then let's look at next week, starting with Tuesday or beyond, to when we want to try to get back together and take a first cut at the full look at the water.
Right, now we need the 7 days notice, right? So that
Correct,
would be.
we could do starting with Tuesday, we could make that happen.
I'm good Tuesday.
I'm out on Tuesday.
You're out on Tuesday?
I'm out the rest of the week after Tuesday,
No, that's that next week too? Or this week?
next week.
Next week. I thought you were going this week and next
This week and next
week.
week.
Oh, man, okay. You're out after Tuesday. All right. And Bruce, you're out Tuesday?
But I'm good Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
And Mike, you're good all week?
I'm good all week except Friday is the planning meeting from 1 to 5.
And then Matt, what's your schedule look like?
Next week?
Yeah.
The only thing I have right now is something on Tuesday morning.
Okay.
So I could do any other time next week.
Okay, so if we needed to do Tuesday, you could do PM. And then Wednesday, you said Wednesday or Thursday, anytime?
Correct.
Okay. You don't know Bert's. Okay. All right. So let me check with Bert because obviously we need a quorum, and then I think Deb Ward may also be back. So I'll shoot something out to pick at least one and probably get 2 of them on the schedule for next week. Maybe Tuesday, Thursday, or Wednesday, Friday, something like that. What time's the planning meeting?
That's on Friday from 1 to 5.
1 to 5. Oof. Okay, so more to follow, Matt, on the time, but I got your input, so we'll get, like I said, we'll try to get two on the schedule for next week. Okay, anything else? Anybody from the audience, questions or comments? Anybody else at the table? All right, great. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Matt.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
And I'll confirm tomorrow with Bert.
Thanks for using WebEx. Visit our website at www.webex.com.
I do have one question. What's the advantage to putting in a separate meter for your irrigation, your outside?
You don't
You
get
don't
charged
charge
for
sewer
sewer charge for that.
You get charged water.
Right.
Okay, so you think there's gonna be an upsurge of people in the city putting those in when these rates go up? I'm just throwing it out.
Could be.